Every Sunday, I stand at the altar of the biggest church in this city, holding the hand of the man thousands call a saint. They see a man of God. They see a perfect marriage. But when the church doors close and the lights go out, that same hand, the one that just blessed 100 children, is used to crush my spirit. He doesn't leave bruises you can see. He uses the Bible as a weapon and his status as a shield. I am the pastor's wife, and I am living in a holy prison. Tonight, I have a recording that could end his ministry and his life as he knows it. But if I release it, I'm not just destroying a man. I'm destroying an entire community's faith. Should I stay silent for the sake of the church, or speak the truth to save myself? Is a secret worth the soul it's crushing? If you believe the truth should always come to light, hit the like button. I need your judgment on this. Subscribe to see if I break the silence or stay in the pews. Share this and ask, is it ever okay to protect a good man who does bad things? Here is the reality behind the stained glass. The air inside our luxury SUV was thick with the scent of expensive oud and sandalwood. The scent of the spirit, Elias liked to call it. To the thousands of people who had just finished shaking his hand at Grace Covenant, that smell was the fragrance of a man who had spent 40 days in the desert with God. To me, sitting in the passenger seat with my hands folded neatly over my designer clutch, it was the smell of a suffocating mask. I remember the weight of that Sunday morning so clearly. It was one of those high Sundays where the choir wore gold and the deacons moved with extra precision. Elias had been magnificent. He had preached a sermon titled The Architecture of a Holy Home, and he had used us, the first family, as the blueprint. He spoke about the sacred bond of marriage, about how a husband is the covering and a wife is the heart. At one point, he reached out and took my hand, pulling me toward him in the center of the stage. The spotlights were so bright they felt like a physical heat, and for a moment, I was blinded. "Look at this woman," he had told the congregation, his voice booming with a warmth that felt like a hug from a father. "She is my strength. She is the reason I can stand here and lead you. Martha is the virtuous woman the Proverbs spoke about." He squeezed my hand. To the people in the pews, it looked like a gesture of overwhelming affection. A man so in love with his wife he couldn't help but hold her tight. But I felt the way his thumb dug into the soft skin of my palm, a steady, rhythmic pressure that signaled I wasn't smiling wide enough. It was a silent command. Perform. Now, as the garage door of our gated estate hummed shut behind us, the performance was ending. Or rather, the public act was ending, and the private one was about to begin. I watched Elias in the rearview mirror as he adjusted his silk tie. The serene, beatific expression he wore behind the pulpit didn't fade all at once. It curdled. It was like watching a beautiful fruit rot in fast forward. The light in his eyes, which usually looked like divine fire, turned into a cold, clinical gray. He didn't say a word as he stepped out of the car. He didn't help me with my bag. The man of God had left the building. The landlord had arrived. I followed him into the house, my heels clicking on the polished marble floors of the foyer. The house was a palace of blessings. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. It was a house built on the tithes and offerings of people who believed their pastor was a saint. But as the door clicked shut, the silence of the house felt like a physical weight. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm. "The hem of your dress," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave into that low, rhythmic rumble that usually signaled a teaching moment. He didn't turn around. He was looking at his own reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror by the door. It was a half-inch too high when you sat down for the choir's second selection. "I saw Deacon Miller look at you. Twice." I felt the familiar coldness settle in my stomach. "I'm sorry, Elias. I tried to pull it down, but the chair." "Don't give me excuses, Martha," he snapped, finally turning to face me. The serenity was gone now. His face was a mask of righteous indignation. "You are the face of this ministry. You are a vessel of the word. When you are careless with your modesty, you are a stumbling block to the brothers. You are inviting the enemy into this house through your vanity." I stood there, my head bowed, playing the role of the submissive wife. I had learned long ago that the fastest way to end these lectures was to absorb them. If I fought back, if I pointed out that the dress was one he had bought for me, he would twist it. He would quote a verse about the spirit of rebellion. He would tell me that I was acting like Jezebel, and that he needed to pray the pride out of me. "I'll be more careful," I whispered. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. He smelled of that expensive cologne and the peppermint he chewed to keep his breath fresh for the altar. He reached out and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. It was a gesture that should have been intimate, but his fingers were cold, and his touch felt like an inspection. "I do this because I love you, Martha," he said, his voice softening into that terrifyingly sweet tone he used when he was correcting me. "I am responsible for your soul. If I allow you to fall into the traps of the world, God will hold me accountable. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, though what I actually understood was that I was being dismantled piece by piece. He patted my cheek and walked toward his study. "Good. Change your clothes. We have the leadership dinner tonight, and I need you to be at your best. I've noticed you've been looking tired lately. It's a bad testimony. People will think you're not resting in the Lord." I watched him go, the heavy oak doors of his study closing with a definitive thud. I was left standing in the foyer of my beautiful, blessed home, feeling like a ghost. I walked to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, the same bed where we prayed together every night before he turned his back to me and fell into a peaceful, holy sleep. I reached for my Bible on the nightstand. It was a beautiful, leather-bound edition with my name embossed in gold on the cover. Elias had given it to me on our 5th anniversary. I opened it, but I didn't turn to the Psalms or the Gospels. I turned to the back where the maps were. Tucked behind the map of the journeys of Paul was a single, folded sheet of paper. The divorce papers. I had been carrying them for 3 months. I had downloaded them at a public library across town, terrified that someone would recognize me. I had filled them out in the small hours of the morning while Elias was in his prayer closet, wrestling with the Spirit. They were my secret. They were the only thing in this house that belonged entirely to me. I looked at the signature line. It was blank. I looked at the man's name on the top, Elias Vance. The world saw a hero. I saw a man who used spirituality as a chain. I saw a man who had convinced me that my own thoughts were demonic and my own needs were selfish. I heard the door to the study open again. Quickly, I tucked the papers back into the maps and closed the Word of God. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and forced a smile onto my face. I could hear him calling for me. He wanted his tea. He wanted his suit pressed. He wanted his trophy back on its shelf. I walked toward the door, my heart screaming, but my face perfectly calm. I was the pastor's wife. I was blessed. I was the architecture of a holy home. And tonight, I was going to stand beside him and smile until my face ached, while the papers in my Bible whispered the truth into the silence. The transition from the sanctuary to the dinner table was a blurred sequence of mechanical perfection. By 7 p.m., I was standing in the dining room of the bishop's favorite steakhouse, the heavy velvet curtains muffling the sounds of the city outside. Elias was in his element. He was regaling the table with a story about a mission trip to Haiti, his hands moving through the air with the grace of a conductor. He was charming, humble, and devastatingly likable. I sat to his right, a position I had occupied so many times I felt like part of the furniture. I laughed when the table laughed. I tilted my head in thoughtful contemplation when Elias made a profound point about servant leadership. But under the table, my hands were clamped together so tightly my nails were leaving crescents in my skin. "Isn't that right, Martha?" Elias asked, turning to me with a smile that reached his eyes but didn't warm them. I hadn't heard the question. I had been staring at the condensation on my water glass, wondering if the bishop knew that Elias had spent the afternoon telling me I was a stumbling block to the faith. "Absolutely," I said, the word coming out with a practiced smoothness that terrified me. Elias has always said that the greatest test of a man's ministry is the peace of his own home. The bishop nodded approvingly, raising his glass toward Elias. A rare wisdom in these times, Elias. You are a lucky man to have a woman who understands the weight of the mantle you carry. Elias squeezed my shoulder. I am a blessed man, Bishop. Truly. The drive home was silent. The blessed man didn't speak until we were inside the house and the security system was armed. He went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his back to me. Your comment at dinner, he said, his voice flat. The one about the test of a man's ministry. It sounded pointed. I was just quoting you, Elias, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I thought it was what you wanted to hear. He turned around and the mask was gone. His eyes were dark, a cold fury simmering just beneath the surface. It sounded like sarcasm. It sounded like you were trying to hint at something. Do you think I'm blind, Martha? Do you think I don't see the way you've been looking at me lately? Like you're judging me? I'm not judging you, I whispered, stepping back toward the hallway. You are a part of me. He raised his voice, though it stayed within that controlled, frightening range. If you are not for me, you are against the work I am doing for the kingdom. When you undermine me, even with a look, you are undermining God. He walked toward me, and for a second, the responsible part of me wanted to apologize. It wanted to beg for forgiveness just to keep the peace, to keep the man of God from turning into the man of the house. But then I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. Earlier that evening, while Elias was in the shower, I had done something I had never dared to do. I had opened the voice memo app. I had renamed a file Sunday Notes and left it running. I had tucked the phone into the hidden pocket of my dress. I'm tired, Elias, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm just tired of the performance. He stopped inches from my face. He didn't hit me. He never had to. He just reached out and gripped my upper arm, his thumb pressing into the muscle with a precision that made my breath hitch. The performance? He hissed. This isn't a performance, you ungrateful girl. This is a calling. I have built a life for you that most women would die for. I have given you status, protection, and a purpose. And you have the audacity to call it a performance because I ask for a little discipline. He leaned in closer, his voice a jagged whisper. You are nothing without this ministry. You are a schoolteacher from a small town who got lucky. If I let you go, you'd be a footnote. You'd be a cautionary tale. Is that what you want? To be the woman who destroyed a great man because she was too weak to handle the pressure. He shook me, just once, a sharp jolt that sent a spike of pain through my shoulder. Go to bed. Pray for a spirit of gratitude. Because if you ever embarrass me in front of the bishop again, I will make sure you realize just how small you really are. He let go of my arm and walked away, leaving me trembling in the dark kitchen. I stood there for a long time, the silence of the house ringing in my ears. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The recording was still running. I hit stop. I looked at the waveform, the jagged spikes of his voice, the low, trembling sound of mine. It was all there. The man of God calling his wife a nothing. The architecture of a holy home being dismantled by the architect himself. I walked to the bedroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't open my Bible tonight. I didn't look at the divorce papers. I just sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the recording. I played it over and over, the sound of his cruelty filling the room. It was the first time in 10 years I felt like I wasn't crazy. It wasn't my lack of faith. It wasn't my pride. It was him. And for the first time, I realized that a recording is a lot like a prayer. Once it's out there, you can't take it back. I looked at the share icon, the little arrow pointing toward a world that still believed he was a saint. Should I send it? The following morning, the sun bled through the heavy silk curtains of our bedroom, casting long golden bars across the carpet that looked like the cage I had finally decided to break. Elias was already gone. He always rose at 5 a.m. for his hour of power, a ritualized prayer session that usually took place in the glass-walled sunroom overlooking the pool. I lay there, motionless, listening to the muffled, rhythmic sound of his voice rising and falling. To anyone else, it was the sound of intercession. To me, it was the sound of a man maintaining his brand. I reached under my pillow and felt the cool, glass surface of my phone. It was still there. The Sunday Notes file was a tiny, 12-megabyte bomb waiting to go off. My heart started that familiar, frantic drumming against my ribs. I had spent 10 years being the responsible one, protecting the ministry, protecting the congregation, protecting the man. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized that the only thing I hadn't protected was myself. I got out of bed and moved with a new, quiet purpose. I didn't head for the kitchen to start his specialized green juice. Instead, I went to the guest room closet. Tucked behind a row of winter coats I rarely wore was an old, battered suitcase from my life before the pulpit. I pulled it out and laid it on the floor. The plan was simple, but the execution felt like treason. I wasn't just leaving a husband. I was defecting from a kingdom. I began to pack. Not the designer dresses Elias bought for me to wear at conferences, but my old jeans, my teaching certificates, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother. Every item I placed in that suitcase felt like a piece of my soul I was reclaiming from the lost and found. I realized then that I needed a verdict. I needed someone else to hear the jagged spikes of that recording before I lost my nerve. If I kept it to myself, Elias would find a way to make me believe I'd hallucinated the cruelty. He would tell me the recording was manipulated by the enemy, or that I was taking his correction out of context. I thought of Sarah, my sister. She was the only person who had never quite bought into the Saint Elias persona. She had stopped coming to our church 3 years ago, citing a bad vibe she couldn't explain. At the time, Elias had made me write her a letter about her slippery slope into secularism. I had cried while I wrote it. I opened my messaging app, my thumb hovering over her name. I attached the audio file. My breathing was shallow, my palms slick with sweat. "Don't call me yet," I typed. "Just listen to this. This is what happens when the man of God gets home." I hit send. The little blue progress bar crawled across the screen. It felt like watching a fuse burn toward a mountain of dynamite. Once she heard it, there would be no going back. I couldn't unring this bell. I walked to the kitchen, my movements mechanical. I heard Elias's footsteps approaching, the heavy, confident stride of a man who owns every square inch of the world he walks on. He entered the kitchen, still wearing his prayer robe, his face glowing with that manufactured peace. "Good morning, Martha," he said, reaching for a mug. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He assumed I was exactly where he left me, compliant, quiet, and small. "I've been thinking. For the spring gala, I want you to lead the testimony section. We need to focus on the strength of the hidden woman. It'll be a powerful bridge to the new building campaign." I stood by the counter, my hand gripping the edge of the marble so hard it ached. "I don't think I'm the right person for that, Elias." He paused, the mug halfway to his lips. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into 2 cold slits. "Excuse me?" I said, "I don't think I'm the right person," I repeated, my voice trembling but holding its ground. "I think the hidden woman is tired of being hidden." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the sudden, sharp intake of his breath. He set the mug down on the counter with a deliberate, echoing clack. "You're having another episode," he said, his voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm, pastoral tone. "The enemy is whispering to you again, Martha. You're letting your emotions override your anointing. We'll talk about this tonight, after I've had time to pray for your discernment. It's not an episode, Elias, and it's not the enemy." He stepped toward me, his shadow stretching across the white cabinets. He didn't touch me, but he leaned in close enough that I could smell the peppermint. "Be very careful, Martha. You are standing on holy ground. Do not let your pride destroy everything God has built through us." He walked out, leaving his tea untouched. I stood there, shaking, waiting for my phone to buzz. 5 minutes later, it did. A single text from Sarah. "I'm outside. Get in the car. Now." I realized then that the reckless part of me was finally taking the wheel. I grabbed the suitcase from the guest room, threw on a coat, and walked toward the front door. But as my hand touched the brass handle, I looked at the security camera keypad. Elias had the app. He would know the second the door opened. He would see me leave. I had the proof. I had the car waiting. But did I have the courage to walk out of the architecture of a holy home and into the unknown? The heavy oak door didn't just open. It felt like I was breaking a seal on a tomb. The security system gave a sharp, high-pitched chirp, a sound that usually meant welcome, but today it sounded like an alarm. I knew the notification was hitting Elias's phone at that exact second. I could almost picture him in his sunroom, his brow furrowing as he looked at the alert. Front door opened. I didn't look back. I gripped the handle of my grandmother's suitcase and ran. The driveway seemed a mile long, the manicured hedges and stone lions mocking my frantic pace. At the curb, Sarah's beat-up silver sedan was idling, looking like a dented chariot of grace against the backdrop of our pristine neighborhood. She didn't even wait for me to close the door before she slammed the car into gear. "I heard it," she said, her voice jagged with a mixture of fury and tears. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, watching for the black SUV that she knew would eventually follow. "Martha, I heard what he said to you. I knew he was a narcissist, but that was demonic. He calls it correction," I whispered, pulling my knees to my chest. I felt small, the adrenaline leaving me in a shivering wave. "He says he's responsible for my soul. He's responsible for a crime, Martha," Sarah snapped, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "That's psychological warfare. And we are going to the bishop. No, we're going to the board. We are ending this." "No," I gasped, the responsible one in me suddenly seizing the controls. "Sarah, you don't understand. If this gets out, the church loses everything. The youth center, the soup kitchen, the jobs. People believe in him. If they find out the man they pray with is the man on that recording, their faith will shatter. I can't be the one who destroys the church. The church is the people, Martha, not the man behind the pulpit," she countered. My phone began to vibrate in my lap. The caller ID didn't say Elias. It said husband. I stared at the screen. The vibrating pulse felt like it was mocking my heartbeat. He was calling. Then he stopped. A second later, a text appeared. "Martha, turn the car around. You are in the middle of a spiritual attack. Do not let your emotions lead you into the wilderness. If you come back now, we can heal this in private. If you don't, you are choosing to walk away from God's covering." It was the sacred threat. He wasn't asking me to come home because he missed me. He was telling me to come home because I was breaking the covering. "He's tracking the car," I realized out loud, my blood turning to ice. The SUV had a built-in GPS, but I was in Sarah's car. Then I remembered my phone. He had the Find My app synced to our family account. He knew exactly which highway we were on. He knew we were heading toward the bishop's estate. "Turn the phone off," Sarah yelled. I reached for the power button, but before I could press it, a second call came through. It wasn't Elias. It was Bishop Harrison's private line. My heart plummeted. Elias had gotten to him first. He had already started the narrative. I answered, my hand shaking so hard the phone rattled against my ear. "Hello, Martha." The bishop's voice was deep, resonant, and filled with a paternal disappointment that hurt worse than a physical blow. "Elias called me. He's distraught. He told me you've had a breakdown and that you've taken off with your sister. He's worried about your safety, and frankly, so am I. He said you're confused about some things he said in private, spiritual discipline, that you've misinterpreted." "Bishop, it's not a misinterpretation," I said, my voice breaking. "I have a recording. I have him on tape." The silence on the other end was long and heavy. "Martha, a recording? Do you realize how that looks? Recording your husband in the sanctity of your home? That's not the act of a wife. That's the act of an adversary. Elias told me you might try to use edited audio to justify this episode. Please, bring the car to my office. Let's talk about this like a family of faith before you do something you can't take back." I looked at Sarah. She had heard every word. She reached over and snatched the phone from my hand. her eyes flashing with a fire I hadn't felt in years. "Bishop," she said, her voice like a blade. "She's not coming to your office to be silenced. She's coming to show you exactly who you've been protecting. And if you don't listen, the internet will. You choose." She hung up and threw the phone into the back seat. We were no longer just running away. We were going to war. But as I looked out the window at the passing trees, I realized the bishop's words were already working. "Recording your husband in the sanctity of your home." I felt the shame creeping back in, the responsible voice whispering that I was the betrayer, that I was the one who had broken the trust. I was a man of God's wife, and I was about to walk into a den of lions with nothing but a 12-megabyte file to protect me. The bishop's office was a room designed to make a person feel small. It was a cathedral of mahogany and leather, where the air smelled of old books and the weight of tradition. Bishop Harrison sat behind his desk like a judge on a throne, his face carved from stone. Beside him stood Elias. My husband didn't look like the man who had hissed at me in the kitchen hours ago. He looked broken. He was wearing his black clerical shirt, his hands clasped in front of him, his head bowed. He looked like a man in mourning. When I walked in with Sarah, he looked up with an expression of such profound, manufactured pity that I almost turned and ran. "Martha," he whispered, stepping toward me. "Thank God you're safe. I was so worried. Your sister, she doesn't understand the pressures of our life. She's filled your head with such anger." "Stay back, Elias," Sarah snapped, stepping between us. The bishop cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding together. "Sit down. All of you. This is a house of God, not a theater for drama. Martha, your husband has told me everything. He's confessed that he was firm with you. He's admitted that in his zeal to protect your soul, he may have used words that were too sharp. He's here to repent. But he's also concerned about this recording. He says you've been planning this, that you've been looking for a way to undermine him for months." I felt the responsible one inside me shrinking. The bishop's words were a trap. If I admitted I recorded him, I was a spy in my own home. If I didn't play it, I was a liar. I looked at Elias, and for a second, he gave me a tiny, imperceptible smirk. It was the look of a man who knew he had already won the jury. "It wasn't a plan, Bishop," I said, my voice trembling. I reached into my bag and pulled out the phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "I recorded him because I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was the one failing. I thought I was the one who lacked faith. But I wasn't." "Martha, please," Elias said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Don't do this. Think of the church. Think of the thousands of people who look to us. Do you really want to tear down the temple because of one bad night in the kitchen? Is your pride worth their salvation? Is your pride worth my life?" I countered. I hit the play button. The recording started. The high-quality speaker on the phone filled the mahogany room with the sound of the garage door hum, followed by the cold, rhythmic voice of the man thousands called a saint. "Your dress was too tight today, Martha. You're a distraction. You're inviting the enemy into this house through your vanity." The bishop shifted in his seat. Elias kept his head bowed, his eyes closed as if he were praying. Then the recording moved to the kitchen. The sound of the glass shattering against the wall was like a gunshot in the silent office. "You are nothing without this ministry. You are a schoolteacher from a small town who got lucky. If I let you go, you'd be a footnote. I will make sure you realize just how small you really are." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and long. I looked at the bishop, expecting to see horror. I expected him to stand up and strip Elias of his credentials right there. Instead, he sighed. He looked at Elias, then back at me, and his eyes were full of a cold, patriarchal weariness. "It's unfortunate," the bishop said softly. "Elias, your language was unseemly. You must go into a period of fasting and counseling. But Martha, you must understand. A man under the pressure of leading thousands sometimes cracks." He spoke out of frustration. "But to record him? To bring this to me as if it were a crime? You are seeking to destroy a great man's work over a few harsh words. A few harsh words? Sarah screamed. He told her she was nothing. He's been breaking her down for a decade. The church is at a critical junction. The bishop continued, ignoring her. We are in the middle of the New Life building campaign. If this recording gets out, the bank pulls the loan. 300 families lose their spiritual home. The youth center shuts down. Martha, I am asking you to be the woman I know you are. Hand over the phone. Let us handle this in-house. We will get Elias the help he needs, and we will protect the flock. I looked at Elias. He was looking at the bishop with a look of humble submission, but his eyes flickered toward me. He was waiting. He knew the bishop would choose the architecture over the inhabitant. He knew the responsible choice was to stay quiet for the sake of the many. I stood there at the intersection of my life. If I gave them the phone, I was going back to the cage, but the church would be safe. If I kept it, I would be free, but I would be the woman who tore down the temple. What is your choice, Martha? The bishop asked, reaching out his hand across the mahogany desk. Are you a daughter of the church, or are you a servant of your own anger? The bishop's hand remained outstretched, a bridge of mahogany and expectation. Behind him, the wall was lined with photos of him shaking hands with presidents and mayors. Men who understood that some truths were too expensive to tell. Elias didn't move. He didn't have to. He had the weight of the institution behind him, and he knew that my responsible heart had been trained since birth to sacrifice itself for the many. One phone, Martha? Elias whispered, his voice returning to that gentle, pastoral hum. To save everything we've built. Think of the children in the youth center. Think of the families who find hope in our pews every Sunday. Don't let your pain be their destruction. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was a small, plastic rectangle, but in this room it was a wrecking ball. I looked at Sarah, who was vibrating with a silent, fierce hope that I would finally choose myself. Then I looked at the bishop's hand. You're right, Bishop, I said, my voice finally finding a steady, cold clarity. The church is at a critical junction. I reached out as if to place the phone in his hand. Elias let out a soft, audible sigh of relief. The tension in the room began to dissipate like steam. They thought they had won. They thought the perfect wife had returned to the script. Then, I pulled my hand back. But a house built on a lie isn't a house of God, I said. It's just a theater, and the show is over. Before either of them could react, I turned to Sarah. Start the car. Martha, sit down, the bishop roared, his voice finally losing its practiced calm. You are bordering on blasphemy. If you walk out that door with that recording, I will see to it that you are stripped of your standing. You will be cast out. You will have nothing. I already have nothing, I said, looking directly at Elias. I've had nothing for 10 years. I've lived in a palace with a man who treated me like a parasite. If the price of the New Life building is my soul, then the building shouldn't exist. Elias lunged for the phone. He was fast, the man of God mask slipping entirely to reveal a desperate, cornered animal. But I was faster. I stepped behind the heavy leather chair, the bishop's desk acting as a barricade. If you touch me, Elias, I'll hit post right now, I warned. My thumb hovering over the social media app one had already opened. I had the file attached. I had the caption written. The truth behind the stained glass. I've already shared the link with 3 major news outlets in the city. If I don't check in with them in an hour, they run the story anyway. It was a lie. I hadn't contacted the news yet, but in that room of master manipulators, it was the only currency they understood. Elias froze. He looked at the bishop, searching for a miracle, but the bishop was already looking away, his mind likely calculating the legal and PR fallout. I walked toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. Sarah opened it for me, her eyes wet with pride. Martha, wait, Elias called out. His voice was different now. It wasn't angry, and it wasn't pastoral. It was small. It was the voice of the man who hid behind the pulpit because he was terrified of being seen. What are you going to do? I paused at the threshold. I looked back at the mahogany, the leather, and the man I had once believed was my gateway to heaven. I'm going to do the only thing a virtuous woman can do, Elias, I said. I'm going to tell the truth. And then, for the first time in my life, I'm going to breathe. We walked out of the office, through the grand lobby with its marble floors and its portraits of great men, and into the blinding afternoon sun. I didn't look back at the bishop's estate. I didn't look back at the SUVs or the security cameras. I got into Sarah's car, and as she pulled away, I took a deep, jagged breath. The air didn't smell like oud or peppermint or old books. It smelled like rain and asphalt and freedom. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the church's group chat. Someone had posted a prayer request for our First Lady's health and mental clarity. Elias was already spinning the narrative. He was already turning me into the villain of his story. I looked at the recording. I looked at the post button. The temple was still standing, but the foundation was gone. And I realized that the responsible choice wasn't to protect the building. It was to warn the people that the roof was about to fall. The post button didn't feel like a weapon when I finally pressed it. It felt like a release valve. I sat in the passenger seat of Sarah's car, watching the little spinning wheel on the screen. With one final click, the Sunday Notes file was no longer my secret. It belonged to the world. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, but instead, a cold, hollow dread settled over me. I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and dropped it into the center of my own life. Within 20 minutes, the silence of the car was shattered. My phone didn't just buzz. It screamed. The notifications came in a frantic, relentless wave. First, it was the inner circle, the deacons' wives and the ministry leads. Then, the congregation. The comments section under my post became a digital battlefield. This can't be real. This is AI. Martha, how could you do this to a man of God? Read one. I always knew something was off. Look at her eyes in the old photos. She's been drowning. Read another. But the most painful ones were the prayers. The public declarations from people I had served for a decade, calling for deliverance from the spirit of betrayal that had clearly seized me. They weren't praying for my safety or my peace. They were praying for my silence. They were protecting the brand because the brand was where they found their own identity. Don't read them, Sarah said, reaching over to snatch the phone away. They're in shock, Martha. People hate it when you break their toys, and to them, Elias was the ultimate toy. He was their shortcut to feeling holy. I'm being excommunicated in real time, I whispered, watching the sunset over the highway. I can feel the ties cutting. The women's group, the choir. It's all disappearing. By the time we reached Sarah's small apartment 2 towns over, the story had jumped from social media to the local news. A leaked audio scandal involving one of the city's most prominent religious leaders. I saw Elias's face on the television in a diner we passed. The same serene, blessed photo from the church website, now juxtaposed with a headline about domestic abuse. Then the counterattack began. Elias didn't call me. He knew better. Instead, he went live from the church sanctuary. I watched the video on Sarah's laptop, my heart in my throat. He was sitting on the edge of the stage, no tie, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who had spent the last 3 hours weeping. Family, he began, his voice thick with a carefully cultivated sorrow. I come to you tonight with a heavy heart. Many of you have heard a recording, a private, painful moment between a husband and a wife. I am not here to hide. I am here to tell you that I am a flawed man. I spoke in anger. I spoke out of a desperate desire to see my wife made whole. Martha has been struggling. She has been fighting a darkness that many of you don't know about. I took the burden of her mental health on my shoulders, and in a moment of exhaustion, I failed. I used words I regret. He paused, a single tear track visible on his cheek. But I ask you, is a man's entire life of service to be erased by 1 minute of a recorded argument? Is our vision for the New Life Center to be sacrificed because I am a sinner in need of grace? Martha is being used by forces that want to see this ministry fail. Pray for her. Pray for her mind. He's good. Sarah hissed, slamming the laptop shut. He's making his abuse look like a burden he was carrying for you. He's turned his cruelty into a sacrifice. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching the jury of the public deliberate. I saw the church's official statement. Pastor Elias will be taking a 2-week sabbatical of restoration while the board investigates. 2 weeks. A slap on the wrist for 10 years of psychological war. I realized then that the truth wasn't enough to kill the idol. The people wanted the temple more than they wanted the truth. They were willing to overlook the rot in the foundation if the spire still looked gold in the sun. I stood in Sarah's small kitchen, looking at the virtuous woman in the reflection of the window. I had lost my home, my status, and my community. I was a traitor to the faith I had served. But as I took a breath, a deep, full breath that didn't catch in my chest, I realized something. Elias was right about one thing. The New Life campaign was in danger. But it wasn't because of me. It was because the light had finally been turned on, and the shadows had nowhere left to hide. I picked up the phone. I had one more file. Not a recording of a fight, but a recording of a meeting, the one where Elias and the treasurer discussed the private accounts. If they wanted to talk about the New Life building, we were going to talk about every single brick. The file I held now was different. If the first recording was a cry for help, this one was a surgical strike. It was from 3 months ago, a rainy Tuesday when Elias had left his office door ajar, thinking I was busy organizing the Purity Conference in the fellowship hall. I had been standing in the hallway, clutching a stack of flyers, when I heard the clink of ice in a glass and the low, hushed tones of Elias and Mr. Henderson, the church treasurer. I played it back in Sarah's quiet kitchen. The audio was muffled, filtered through heavy wood and my own heartbeat, but the numbers were clear. Elias wasn't just investing the building fund. He was skimming the cream off the top. He spoke about offshore accounts and consulting fees paid to shell companies, all while the congregation was being told to give until it hurts, so the children could have a new gymnasium. "This is the heart of it," Sarah whispered, leaning over my shoulder. "This is why the bishop was so desperate to protect him. It's not just about spiritual discipline. It's about the money. If Elias falls, the whole financial house of cards goes with him." "I never wanted to be a whistleblower," I said, my eyes burning. "I just wanted to be a wife." "You were a hostage, Martha. Whistleblowers are heroes. Hostages are just survivors." By Monday morning, the sabbatical of restoration was already being hailed by the loyalists as a sign of Elias's deep humility. The church's social media pages were flooded with #StandWithPastor graphics. They were rebranding his abuse as a burnout struggle. I knew I couldn't just post the second file to the public. If I did, I'd be sued into oblivion before the first person hit play. I needed a different kind of jury. I needed the law. We drove to the city's district attorney's office. I felt like a ghost walking through the corridors of secular justice, still wearing the modest floral skirt and pearls that had been my uniform for a decade. I sat across from an investigator named Miller, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut who didn't care about spiritual coverings or anointings. I handed her the phone. "This is a recording of a private financial meeting," I told her. "It details the misappropriation of the Grace Covenant Building Fund. I have the ledger dates and the names of the shell companies mentioned." As Miller listened, her expression didn't change, but her pen started moving. For the first time, I wasn't being told I was unstable or possessed by a spirit of rebellion. I was being treated as a witness. "Why now?" she asked, pausing the tape. "Because I used to believe that protecting the man was the same as protecting the faith," I said. "I realized that the man is using the faith to protect himself. I'm not the one destroying the church, investigator. He already did that. I'm just the one calling the fire department." When we left the office, the air felt electric. I knew that by afternoon, subpoenas would be flying. The bishop, the treasurer, and my husband were about to find out that a virtuous woman isn't just one who stays quiet. It's one who seeks justice. But the responsible one in me was still screaming. Every time I thought about the thousands of people who had sacrificed their grocery money to give to that fund, my heart broke. They were going to lose their dreams. They were going to feel cheated not just by a man but by God himself. I checked my phone. Elias had sent one last message. No scripture this time. No pastoral tone. You think you're winning, Martha? If I go down, I'm taking every memory of us with me. I'll tell them you were the one who suggested the accounts. I'll tell them you spent the money. Who are they going to believe? A man of God who made a mistake, or a bitter wife who's been hiding in the shadows? He was doubling down. He was going to use the Jezebel narrative to frame me for the very crimes I was exposing. He was banking on the fact that his voice carried more weight than mine. I looked at Sarah. He's going to lie. He's going to say I was the mastermind. Let him, Sarah said, her eyes flashing. Because while he's talking, the auditors are going to be counting. Numbers don't have a pastoral tone, Martha. They just have the truth. The Sunday morning after the subpoenas were served was the loudest silence of my life. I sat in Sarah's car, parked across the street from Grace Covenant. It was 10:45 a.m. Usually, I would be in the green room, smoothing my hair, checking Elias's lapel for lint, and preparing to walk onto that stage to the roar of 1,000 people. Today, I was a spectator to my own execution. The police cars arrived just as the opening worship song reached its crescendo. I could hear the muffled drums and the soaring vocals from the street. A song about walls coming down. The irony was a bitter weight in my chest. I stepped out of the car. I knew I shouldn't be there. Sarah begged me to stay in the apartment, but I had to see it. I had to see the moment the idol was pulled from the pedestal I had helped build. The scene was chaotic. The front doors of the church, the massive, bronze-plated gates, burst open, and the congregation spilled out like water from a broken dam. People were crying, some were screaming, and others were simply wandering the sidewalk in a daze. In the center of the whirlpool, I saw Elias. He was in handcuffs. He didn't look like a martyr. He looked like a man who had finally been caught in a house of mirrors. His silk suit was rumpled, and the peace of the Lord had been replaced by a jagged, frantic desperation. Behind him, the bishop was being escorted out by 2 officers, his face hidden behind a briefcase. Then, someone spotted me. "There she is!" a voice shrieked. It was Sister Beverly, the head of the usher board, a woman I had spent hundreds of hours praying with. She ran toward me, her face contorted with a rage that felt demonic. "You traitor! You Judas! You destroyed this house for a recording? You destroyed our children's future for your pride." Within seconds, I was surrounded. These were the people I had called family. These were the women who had called me blessed. Now they were a mob. They didn't see the theft. They didn't see the psychological bruises. They only saw the woman who had turned off the lights in their sanctuary. "He was a man of God," a man yelled, spittle hitting my cheek. "God would have handled him. It wasn't your place to bring the law into the sanctuary." I stood my ground, though my legs felt like water. "The law was already in the sanctuary," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It was in the building fund he stole. It was in the lies he told you every Sunday while he was skimming your sacrifices to buy offshore stability. I didn't destroy this house. I just showed you that it was built on sand." Elias was being led toward a squad car. As he passed me, the officers paused for a second to clear the crowd. He looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't see the pastor. I didn't even see the abuser. I saw a small, hollow man who was terrified of the dark. "You've won, Martha," he spat, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "I hope your truth keeps you warm at night, because you have nothing left. No church, no home, no husband. You're just a footnote now." "I'd rather be a footnote in the truth," I whispered, "than a chapter in your lie." As the car door slammed and the sirens began to wail, the crowd began to disperse, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk. Some people glared at me as they walked away. Others just looked through me as if I were already a ghost. I walked back to Sarah's car. My heart was a shattered mess, but for the first time in 10 years, The responsible one and the reckless one were finally at peace. I had done the most responsible thing a person can do. I had stopped protecting the predator. I looked at the church building. The New Life sign was still standing, but the letters were already starting to peel in the sun. It wasn't a temple anymore. It was just a building. And I realized that the people who were angry at me weren't actually angry at me. They were angry that they had to find their own way to God now, without a middleman who sold them a polished version of heaven. I got into the car and closed the door. The silence was finally mine. I am sitting on a small balcony now, in a studio apartment that smells of fresh paint and cheap coffee. It's 1,000 square miles smaller than the estate I left, but I can breathe here. The trial is still months away. The news cycle has moved on to the next scandal, the next fallen leader, the next virtuous woman who decided to speak. Elias is out on bail, living in a small house owned by one of the few loyalists who still believes he was framed. He's still posting videos, still quoting scripture, still trying to build a new throne out of the debris of the old one. But I am no longer in his audience. I spend my days teaching again. I spend my nights reading books that aren't the Bible and listening to music that isn't hymns. I am learning who Martha is when she isn't a first lady, when she isn't a covering, and when she isn't a trophy. The church I left is still divided. Some have found new places to worship. Others have walked away from faith entirely, their hearts too scarred by the betrayal to ever trust a pulpit again. That is the weight I carry. That is the responsible part of the verdict. I didn't just expose a man. I exposed the fragility of an entire system. I look at the phone sitting on the table. The recording is still there. I haven't deleted it. It's a reminder of the night the nothing decided to be everything. I am the narrator of this story, but you are the jury. I stood at the altar of a saint and realized he was a monster. I had the choice to stay quiet for the sake of the many, or to speak out for the sake of the one. I chose to burn the temple. Was the bishop right? Should I have handed over the phone? Should I have allowed the ministry to continue, the New Life Center to be built, and the families to keep their hope, even if it meant I stayed a prisoner in a gilded cage? Is the collective peace worth more than one woman's soul? Was I right to tear it all down, even if it meant shattering the faith of thousands? Even if it meant a community lost its home and a mission was destroyed? Is a truth that destroys better than a lie that builds? I can hear the bells of a nearby church ringing in the distance. They sound different now. They don't sound like a summons. They sound like a choice. What is your verdict? Am I the woman who saved her soul, or the woman who destroyed a sanctuary? The jury is in session. Tell me your truth in the comments. I'm finally ready to listen.